Here we go, Biology 1. Okay, of course, I told y'all I'm not going to be there today, but Miss Frost is substituting for me today, so you all be nice to her. Okay, I told my other class, there is not a soul in that co-op that is just saying, oh, I want to sub for that biology teacher, because I don't think anybody really likes it. So, yeah, let's be nice to her because she has offered to substitute this class. The good part about substituting is nobody has to teach. All they gotta do is pop in a video of me. So here I am, and here we go. I'm gonna open us up like I will every week. I'm gonna open us up in prayer, okay? Join me. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the opportunity for me to still be able to teach, even though I will be gone, that we have this ability to, through technology, for me to be seen and teach this class as you would have me do. Lord, I pray that as we get into this information, that you open our hearts and open our minds to see you in all of creation. All this I ask in the one who made it possible, Jesus. Amen. Okay, here we go. All right, open your books to page 1. Starting off on page 1, okay? Biology. The word biology in itself means the study of life. Bio means life. Ology means the study of. So biology is the study of life. I got my drink. I've already done one class here at home, so my voice is already a little tired. So here we go. If biology is the study of life, how do we know what life is? How do you know if something is alive or if it's dead? Well, believe it or not, there are 4 criteria to figure that out. The first criteria is that all forms of life, and you're going to need to know these, it's on your test. The first criteria for life is that it must have a DNA. All life forms have DNA. The second thing, all life forms have a method by which they extract energy from their surroundings and convert it into the energy that sustains them. So they take energy from one thing to create energy for themselves. While I'm at home, I have home interruptions. So please be aware that while I'm making this video, people are going to walk back and forth. Somebody's going to ask me a question, or I'm going to have to fuss at a kid. It is the way of life. It's the way of my home. So give me just 1 second. Hey, would you go tell your brother to shut up?
Yes, I will.
Or just tell him, shut his door. Tell him not to be so loud.
Okay.
I swear, not a soul in this house talks low. It's like yell is common tone. Drives me crazy. He's in his room, but he's playing a video game with somebody on the internet, and he's talking to them like they're as far away as they are, but he has to reach them verbally without a microphone. It's killing me. I told y'all he should have gone to college, like gone away to college. So every living thing has DNA, and it's able to extract energy and use that energy to sustain its life. The third thing, all life forms can sense changes in their environment and respond to those changes. 4, all life forms reproduce, period. So if it's alive, it reproduces, it adapts to its environment, it extracts energy and uses it for their body functions, and it has DNA. If it has none of those things, guess what? It's dead. Okay, so first let's talk about DNA. DNA, the good long name for it, is deoxyribonucleic acid. You'll need to know that later on too. Not right now in this semester, but you will need to know it in like next semester. I think we talk about DNA next semester. Okay, all life forms have DNA. Page 2. In order to make life, we must take the chemicals that make it up and organize them in a way that will promote the other life functions mentioned in their list. So the chemicals themselves cannot extract and convert energy, sense and response changes, or reproduce. In order to perform these functions, the chemicals must be organized so that they work together in the right way. Now, let's say you got on Walmart.com and you ordered a bicycle, and the bicycle came in a box this big. And you're like, oh my gosh, I ordered a bicycle. It should be a bicycle, right? But what you figured out is you're going to have to put this bicycle together. And guess what? It did not come with instructions. So you have to know where things go. And guess what? If you don't get them in the right order, the bicycle could be a little dangerous, right? You don't want to be sitting on no pedals or nothing. So DNA is like the building blocks for your body or for all living things. So this DNA is the organizational map in which things live and how it knows what to do, what function. It's like the instruction manual on what is supposed to happen within that specific organism. How cool is that? DNA is the set of instructions that takes the chemicals that make up life and arrange them in the right way so that it's a perfect living system. Energy conversion in life. In order to live, we're midway through page 2. In order for something to live, organisms need energy. That is why our second criteria states that all life forms must be able to absorb energy from its surroundings and convert it form of energy that will sustain its life. It does that through metabolism. Let's break down the word metabolism, which is in your little papers that I gave you last week. Meta means beyond. Bol means throw or place. Ism means the act or practice. So what it does is metabolism takes something and it puts it together and moves it beyond. I don't know what that was. It moves it beyond the act and practice, meaning it takes this thing and does something different with it for further use, okay? Metabolism, the sum total of all processes in an organism that converts energy and matter from outside sources and uses that energy and matter to sustain the organism's life. Metabolism. Let's say I'm a human. Hard to imagine, but I am. Let's say I'm a human. And where do I get my energy? Do I get my energy from the sun? Actually, sometimes the sun drains me. Doesn't it, y'all? So instead, we get our energy from food. Sometimes too much energy. And when you get too much energy, it stores. You get the stored energy. Stored energy right there, okay? So you take the food, you bring it in, and it helps your body keep going. If I stopped eating, my body would shut down because my brain would shut down. Everything, my heart, my lungs, everything would shut down because I'm not giving it proper nutrition. I'm not giving it proper energy to run. So the metabolism is how well my body uses that energy. It takes the one form of energy and makes something else, uses it to function. Metabolism can be split into two categories, anabolism and catabolism. Anabolism is the building up. So anabolism is the sum total of all processes in an organism which uses in simple chemical building blocks to produce large chemical structures. So it builds up your body systems. Then you have catabolism. Catabolism is the sum of all processes in organisms that break down chemicals to produce energy and simple compound building blocks. Think about your body breaking things down. And then think about how it uses them to build up. So, your body will take food and it'll break that food down in order for it to be used for energy. Now, let's say I wanted to build some muscle. I want to go to the gym and build some muscle. One of the things that I need to consume is protein. So when I put the protein in, let's say through whey protein or meat, okay, I'm going to eat a steak. So I eat the steak, I put it in my mouth, my body breaks down those proteins, and then it uses that protein. So my body breaks it down through catabolism, but then it uses those proteins to help build up muscle and lean muscle strength. So it uses that protein to build new proteins within my muscles, and that is anabolism. All right. Now, energy that an organism gets from its surrounding is very important. Green plants take energy from the sun, and it takes that energy to produce its own food. So that process is called photosynthesis. Photo means light, and synthesis means the production of. So it uses the light to produce sugars and food for itself. Let's see. If plants and other photosynthetic organisms absorb their energy from the sun, where do other life forms get theirs? Well, some organisms eat the plants, and they get energy from eating the plants. Let's say a bunny. A bunny is not going to go around eating a steak, right? But God created them to eat plants to get their energy. Sun comes down, feeds the plant produces food for itself, which then the bunny comes along, eats the plant, and what the plant has produced also gives energy and nutrients to the bunny. All right? If you are a plant eater, you are a herbivore. Herb means plant. Vor means diet. So a herbivore is an organism that only eats plants. Now, if you have the bunny that ate the plant that the sun fed, is there something that'll eat the bunny? Let's think. A tiger. A tiger can come along and eat the bunny. Now, that tiger gets the energy it gets its energy from eating what the bunny is made of, which ate the plant and what it's made of, and the sun provided the general source for all of it. So it starts with the sun, okay? Now, that makes the tiger a carnivore. A carnivore is defined as, on page 3, an organism that only eats meat. Doesn't eat plants, just eats meat. Carn means meat. Carne. Carn means meat. So vor means eat. So it's a meat eater. Now, what about us? I could eat that bunny, but I also like me a side salad, right? I can eat the plants and the bunny. So that's called omni. Omni means all things. So omnivore means that I eat everything. Okay? I like it all. So let me have the bunny and I'll eat the plant too. I'll eat the fruit from the plants. I eat it all. That's an omnivore. Okay? And you and I are omnivores. We were created and designed to be omnivores. So we look on page 4, top paragraph, second sentence. We took a large number of organisms that live on the earth and placed them into one of 3 groups: herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores. This kind of breaking people up into groups is called classification. Biologists have taken an enormous amount of data and have arranged it into many different classification systems. These classification systems allow us to see the similarities and relationships that exist between organizations in creation. Now, let's look at our pictures here. There's a giraffe. Now, a giraffe eats only plants. So what is it? What? Tell me what it is. It's a herbivore. That's right. Okay. Now, we've got our tiger. What does our tiger eat? Meat. What does that make him? A carnivore. And then humans eat both. They eat plants and meats, and we are omnivores. The classification system that we talked about groups organisms by what they eat, okay? Thus, organisms that eat similar things are grouped together. But this is not the only way that we can classify organisms. In order to learn how energy is distributed from the sun to all creatures, we could alternatively classify organisms according to these groups: producers, consumers, and decomposers. So, producers are organisms that produce their own food. And a good way to know what these are is think about a grocery store. If you want plants, fruits, and vegetables, you go to the produce section, because the produce section is made up of producers that make their own food. Produce, producers. Simple, okay? Plants are produce. Next is consumers. It says organisms that eat living producers and or other consumers for food. So what that means is it eats the producers or other consumers. So a consumer consumes meat and other stuff. It doesn't make its own food. It has to be fed. All right? Decomposers. And that makes up a huge group there, because that puts everything in figure 1-1 there, all in consumers. All right? Next is decomposers. Decomposers are organisms that break down the dead remains of other organisms. So that tends to be things like bacteria and fungus, because it breaks the stuff down. That's where it gets its food. So, 1, producers produce their own food, produce. Consumers eat producers and other consumers. And decomposers are what decomposes. It breaks down all of the dead stuff, okay, like fungus and bacteria. That helped a little bit. It's starting to get a little dark outside. Okay, let's look here. Hi, Annie. Let's look here at this picture. I call this the circle of life, and I would normally sing my little Lion King version, but I'm lazy, and I don't want to do it right now. I don't want to do it. The circle of life. That's what it is. Okay, here we've got the sun. Look at the sun. Energy comes from the sun down to the producers. That's a tree. Tree produces its own food through photosynthesis. So the sun gives energy to this plant. Go to the left. Energy goes from the producer to the consumer. Look at our giraffe. Our giraffe is just eating away on that tree. And then look down. Nala. Nala has caught the giraffe and is eating the giraffe. And she's getting her food from the giraffe. Then Nala dies. Nala starts to break down and decompose. Bacteria and fungus around her starts to break her body down to decompose. That decomposed bacteria, fungus, creates nutrition for the soil, which is then reabsorbed back into the producers. How cool is that? That's the circle of life. That's how God created it. Otherwise, we'd have dead bodies laying all over the place, all stacked up, if they didn't start to decompose. If they didn't break down. Can you imagine all the people through the world stacked up dead? Ew. No. So they break down, they decompose. We put them in the earth to get them out of the way so that they can decompose naturally. The earth absorbs the nutrients from the people and or the animals or the leaves, and they help create further life. It's pretty amazing. So turn the page. Bing! Now, as a point of terminology, producers can also be called autotrophs. Now, some of the words that I gave you on your little list, auto means self. So, troph means nutrition or feeder. So, that means self-feeder. Then there's heterotroph. Hetero means other. So troph means feeder. So that means other feeder. It feeds off other things. Isn't that just the coolest? Organisms that are able to make their own food, self-feeders, autotrophs. Heterotrophs, they eat off other things. Let's do this on your own together. So I'm going to give you a second to get out a piece of paper. And while you do that, I'm going to move over here and sit down. I've been standing up for quite a while teaching now, not for this class, but for my other class. And I'm tired. So I'm getting my book. And I'm going to take you with me over to my dining room table. And when I do that, I'm going to have to close this curtain because there's just too much light behind me. Get it closed. Okay. Has everybody got their paper out? I'm going to go get my drink. Everybody get their paper out. Remember how I showed you? Put your name on your paper. Let's see if that helps. Yes. Okay. I'll sit kind of like this. That way we won't have that blaring light behind us. This is my extra cabinet. We ran out of cabinet space for all these stupid people that live here. Gotta feed them, they say. Feed your kids or you go to jail. Pfft. Feed my kids. We feed them. They eat like 3 times a day. Actually, they eat like 5 times a day. We have scheduled food times. I'm that mama. My kids eat at 8, 11, 1, 4, and about 7. I normally have dinner done by 7. So, yeah, we have scheduled food times because we have so many people that live in this house. If they just ate whenever they wanted to, we wouldn't have no food. I wouldn't need this at all because we wouldn't have any food. So this is like my little extra thing that I have to decide. Okay, my house is kind of a wreck right now because we're getting ready to go on vacation. So I'm like stacking things up. You know, I got like right over here on my table, I've got a bunch of beach towels and I've got sheets stacked up because where we're going, we have to take our own towels and our own bedding, which I don't mind. I'd rather sleep on my sheets than somebody else's sheets. So anyway, are we talking about biology here? Let's do our on your owns. 1.1. Classify the following organisms as herbivores, carnivores, or omnivores. A, is it, it's a tiger. Is it a herbivore, a carnivore, or an omnivore? Did somebody answer me? Carnivore. Cows? Herbivores. See, humans, we eat earthing. We're almost like goats. We'll eat anything they put in front of us. D, sheep. Sheep are herbivores. They do not, by choice, eat meat. 1.2, A. Classify the following organisms as producers, consumers, or decomposers. A. What is a rose bush? Did y'all answer me? See, I'm trying to give you time to answer me, even though I'm not there, but somebody's listening to you, so, and you never know. I could be just around the corner. I'm not. So, what is a rose bush? It is a producer. It's a plant. Now let's look at B, yeast. Yeast is a fungus. What y'all thinking that is? Does fungus eat meat or plants? Or actually, fungus is a decomposer. It is a fungus that breaks things down. Okay, let's see. How about a lion? A lion is a producer. No, it's not. Tricked you. It is a consumer. And humans, we are consumers too. My son is over there playing with the remote control. Could you please quit pushing that button? Okay. Let's see. Sensing and responding to change. That's the third criteria of life. Our third criterion for life is that it senses and responds to change in its surroundings. It's important to realize that in order to meet this criteria, an organism's ability to sense changes is just as important as its ability to respond to the change. I'm responding to changes. Living organisms are all equipped with some method of receiving information about their surroundings. They have what's called receptors. Receptors are, according to the book, special structures that allow living organisms to sense the conditions of their internal or external environment. Your skin is full of receptors. So let's say that it's a hot day. Well, you'll know that it's hot because your skin says, oh, law, it's hot. And then you go jump into the swimming pool. And the swimming pool is nice and cold. And that nice cold pool gives you a whole new idea of your surroundings. When you're that hot, the first thing you want to do is cool off. So your brain says, go jump in the pool to cool off. That is you responding to the stimuli. How cool is that? But the thing is, once you jump in the pool, you feel like there's 1,000 tiny knives stabbing you all over your body, which makes you think that that wasn't such a good idea. But then again, your body needs to cool off, so it's probably not the worst idea. I wish I'd have gone to the pool today, but I had to do this with y'all. You've ruined it. All living organisms' ability to sense and respond to change in its surrounding environment is a critical part of survival because God's creation is always changing. What about a lizard? Okay, my daughter has a stupid lizard. It's some kind of dragon. I think I might have told y'all about that the other day. Its name is Spyro. Spyro has to be in a warm environment or it gets too cold and its little circulatory system slows down. So that stupid lizard lays under this heat rock and there's this light that shines on the rock and the lizard goes under the rock, and if it gets too cool, it gets on top of the rock. Ugh. I just don't dig it. But God created it to know, hey, my systems aren't working correctly. I sense a difference in my environment, so I crawl up to where the light bulb is and get warm. That is, it's sensing changes and responding to the changes. Okay? That's pretty cool. So, all life forms reproduce. We need to know, out of this section, the biggest things that you need to know is the difference between sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. So what is the difference between that? Let's look at our first definition. A means without. So asexual reproduction means that it reproduces without sex. So reproduction is accomplished by one single organism. It can just reproduce itself. Oh my gosh, we're going to learn about that in a few weeks, and it's like one of my favorites. I love it. It's so stinking cool to watch how they go bop, bop. They just, it's amazing. Then you have sexual reproduction, where you have to have a male and female. It requires two different organisms that share information to form offspring. Okay? Now, reproduction always involves the concept of inheritance. So in asexual reproduction, the coolest thing about inheritance is it's an exact duplicate copy. It is identical. There are no changes whatsoever. But in sexual reproduction, you have this organism and this organism. My nose itches. And even though they're the same organism, even though they're two humans or two dogs or two protozoa, even though they might be two of the same species or same class, they will still be different. So they have different DNA, and those two separate DNA will create something that is a combination of the two. That is how you can tell the difference between its offspring. It makes science predictable, okay? So inheritance is the process by which physical and biological characteristics are transmitted from the parent or parents of the offspring. In asexual reproduction, the characteristics and trait inherited by the offspring are under normal circumstances identical to the parent. It's the same DNA. So it's one set of DNA. There's not this separate DNA here. It's this one DNA that breaks out. So it's exactly the same. In sexual reproduction, like I said, it's different. You have one here, it's two different sets of DNA, and then in the offspring, there is a shared form of DNA. So it'll be a little bit different. Now, on page 8, we start talking about mutations. A mutation is an abrupt and marked change in the DNA of an offspring compared to that of its parents. Let's look at the last paragraph here in the middle of the page. Not everything can have offspring. Does that mean that it's not alive? No. It's important to note that in some living organisms, they cannot produce viable offspring. When a horse and a donkey mate, you end up with a mule. A mule kind of looks like a big horsey donkey, right? Have y'all ever seen a mule? They're big, strong work animals. Mules are great. However, adult mules cannot produce offspring of their own. You can't take a mule and another mule and produce a mule. That mutation from having a donkey and a horse make it sterile to where it can't reproduce. But it's still alive. It is still a living product. It's just that its body doesn't work in a way that it can have offspring. That is incredibly cool, isn't it? Let's see. Even though they can't produce the offspring, their cells will reproduce quite frequently so that it stays alive. So there is cellular reproduction, but there is not sexual reproduction within those animals. You're okay, Jack. Hey, what's he want? Oh, sorry. Okay. So what I advise you now is to go ahead and do 1.3. You'll probably do it here in a minute, okay? Don't do it quite yet. Life's secret ingredient. I'm going to pull this over here. I'm going to position myself out a little bit so I can look down at my book. Now that we have a good idea of whether or not something is alive, another question that should come to mind is what gives life the characteristics that we learned in the previous sections? As we said before, if we chemically analyze an organism, gather together of all the chemicals contained in it and threw it in a pot, we would not have a living organism, kind of like the bicycle. Just because you got all the parts in a box does not mean that you have a bicycle. Those chemicals would be useless without its DNA. However, if we were able to isolate a full set of an organism's DNA and throw it in a pot, we still couldn't get the living organisms. We have to have a bunch more information. Life is more than a collection of chemicals and information. There is something more. Scientists have tried to understand that something more, but they can't figure it out. The secret ingredient that separates life from non-life is a mystery of modern science. And of course, to believers, we know that it is our creative God. Look on page, I don't know what page that is, 9. 1, 2, third paragraph down. Most important thing that you're ever going to learn in your academic career as a whole is that science has its limitations. Science is not 100% spot on, but it's a good guess. God gave us science. God gave us things to look into and to try to figure out. And that is what science is. It's observable knowledge. Observable knowledge. Okay? So let's start talking about the scientific method. As we start to talk about the scientific method, I want you all to know that right now, in this point of time, we are living the scientific method. Let's see what that is, okay? The scientific method is a system that provides a framework in which scientists can analyze situations, explain certain phenomena, and answer questions. The scientific method starts with observation. That's what science is. It's observation. Observation allows the scientist to collect data. Once enough data has been collected, the scientist forms a hypothesis that attempts to explain some facet of the data or attempts to answer the question that science is trying to answer. A hypothesis is an educated guess. Now, that educated guess is brought about through collected data. So, if I'm looking at my son's foot, okay, and because he's hurt his little foot today, if I look at his foot and I see a bump on the top of his foot and it hurts really bad for him to walk, he can barely walk. Well, he can, but I'm just saying, if I see a bump and it looks like a bone and it's red and bruised and he's really in a lot of pain, my hypothesis, my guess is that that bone is broken, right? I can assume that he has a broken foot. Now, that's my educated guess, not just as a nurse, but as a mama. I mean, as a person, you're going to be able to look and see somebody's arm is all jacked up and crooked and think, oh, they broke their arm, right? I mean, you don't need a whole lot more information, but could it be something else? It could be. Okay. Then, after we have formed this hypothesis, this educated guess as to what's going on, we have a theory. Theory is a hypothesis that's been tested. Now, let's say I'm a nurse at the hospital and I see my a kid and another kid and another kid and another kid over and over and over again with a bump on their foot that looks like a bone is sticking out. And we do this test of an x-ray and we see the bone with our own eyes. My theory is that if it is sticking out, you can't walk on it, it's bruised, painful, and red. Thank you. That is a lot bigger than what I thought it was. I got me a new whiteboard and man, it's huge. It's really big. Oh, wow, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Okay, I'm going to have to figure something out there. Okay, so I can't get over how big that whiteboard is they just brought in. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. So anyway, okay. So once I look at something and I've made this hypothesis that that might be a broken bone, and then place my theory that if there's a bump on the skin, it's bruised, it's red, it can't walk on it, have all of these symptoms that correlate with what it could be, my theory is it's a broken bone. So then we x-ray it. So then I might make it into scientific law on page 10 by testing this theory and consistent generations of data. That means the consistent over and over and over and over again, I get the same result, then I might say that it's scientific law. So the scientific law is the theory that's been tested for generations with the same type of data. Now, Ignaz Semmelweis was a Hungarian doctor, and he lived in the early to mid 1800s. He was appointed to this really high-tech for its time hospital ward in Vienna. And patients were dying at a rate that far exceeded the other wards in the hospital. And he starts freaking out a little bit. He's thinking, why are all of my patients dying? Semmelweis observed this situation for several weeks. He was trying to figure out what was different with his ward than the others. The only noticeable difference was that his ward was the first one that the doctors and the medical students performed. They visited this ward after they performed autopsies. Ew. So that's the only difference. So he had to go back and say, why are all these people dying? What makes this specific ward of the hospital different? Can you think in his mind all the things that he was going through? Who were they exposed to? What did they do before they came in here? What happened here? What happened here? So he was really trying to come up with some ideas as to why these people were dying. Can you imagine where his brain had to go? So eventually he started realizing, oh, wait a minute. As soon as we're done with our autopsies, this is where all of the med students and I go. So Semmelweis developed a test. He instituted a rule that all the doctors had to wash their hands when they finished their autopsies. Oh my gosh. I have never in my life even considered not washing my hands after I've done an autopsy. And when I say autopsy, I mean dissection. But I did autopsies too. So yeah, ew. Ugh, that just grosses me out on a different level. So he came up with this idea that doctors were carrying something from the dead people to these patients in his ward. And the first step was exercising the scientific method. He came up with a hypothesis. His educated guess was, these people are tracking in bacteria from the dead bodies. So his theory was that you should, if you wash your hands, hypothesis was if you wash your hands, then you can eliminate the bacteria from the dead bodies. His theory was that if you wash your hands, these people don't get sick. So every day, as people would leave the autopsy lab and go to take care of these patients, they would wash their hands. The clean hands gave new data every day. And so as they accumulated these generations of new data, they showed that dead bodies put off a bacteria that, if not washed off your hands, could cause other people to be sick and cause cross-contamination. So he instilled modern day hand washing for cleanliness between patients and just in general in life. I mean, that's one of your rules right now. That's your number one criteria for staying well right now, is hand washing. Although, and get this, the doctors didn't like his rules. They didn't like, can you imagine that? Somebody puts forth a rule that's best for you, that helps prevent others from being sick, but you don't like that rule, so you start to buck it. Oh boy, that's right here. Doctors did not like his new rules, and they grudgingly obeyed them, and the death rate in the ward decreased significantly. Good advice that this hypothesis of washing your hands between the dead bodies and this floor was correct. You would think that the doctors would be overjoyed, but they were not. In fact, they got so tired of having to wash their hands that they had him fired for making them wash their hands. His successor, the guy who came after him, was anxious to win the approval of all those doctors that were complaining, and guess what? The death rate shot back up. So, although Semmelweis's work was not appreciated until after his death, his hypothesis was eventually confirmed through experiments and scientific theory, new generations of data, and it became scientific law that you wash your hands. Well, duh. Okay, now look at page 11, the illustration of scientific method. This just gives you a generalized illustration of what we just talked about. You make observations, you form a hypothesis, you collect the data. If the data doesn't work out, you come back and you make another hypothesis. And you keep doing that until your hypothesis becomes a theory. Once you have your theory, you keep practicing it over and over again to collect generations of data. And then if that is all successful, it becomes scientific law. On the bottom of that page is 1.4 and 1.5. Here's the limitation in the scientific method. At the end of the previous section, we said that if a theory survives the scientific method, it becomes scientific law with reasonable trustworthiness. Now, what is the one thing in life that would make this reasonable? It says reasonable trustworthiness. We know that we are a flawed creation. We are flawed people. We are inherently sinful. So that makes us mess up. Humans are the reason that scientific experiments are flawed. Data can be flawed because of me, because of you, because of these scientists. So there's a question that says, why does the law of spontaneous generation which we're going to talk about spontaneous generation in just a second. My leg just fell asleep. Ow. Why does the law of spontaneous generation last for so long? It's because people are flawed. It's flawed experiments. Let's look at that. Scientific laws are consistently being overthrown due to the fact that it's impossible to test them completely. For almost 100 years, people have been looking for this specific kind of fish, okay? This one fish, we'd had fossils of it, so they assumed that it had gone extinct. For hundreds of years, they thought that this fish was extinct because nobody ever saw one. All they saw was its fossils. And in 1938, guess what? They found one of those fish. And so they saw that, we didn't go deep enough when we did our fishing. We didn't look in the right place. But off the coast of South Africa, they found this fish. And it showed that although scientists had declared this animal, this fish, extinct, that it was flawed because the people that were doing the digging didn't go deep enough, didn't do enough research to find this fish. So these, the data, the experiments can be flawed. Scientific laws are overthrown because the experiments that support them are flaws. For example, this is great. In 350 BC, one of the greatest known Greek philosophers, Aristotle, observed that if a person left out a piece of meat on the countertop, that maggots would be produced by the meat, that maggots would appear on the meat within a few days. From that observation, he made a hypothesis. He did his tests. His guess was, if I leave the meat on the countertop, it will produce maggots. So he put the meat on the countertop, and guess what? Maggots over and over and over again. So he came up with the idea that there are things that spontaneously generate. That means that they happen without creation. They happen out of nowhere. So that they just poof, happen. They create themselves. Like putting a piece of meat out, the meat creates these maggots out of nowhere. So as time went on, more and more experiments were performed to support spontaneous generation. As a result, the hypothesis was quickly accepted as a theory, and then it was made into scientific law. They were like, yeah, data's pretty good. There's meat, there's maggots, so yeah, we're going to go with spontaneous generation. So then Jean-Baptiste Van Helmont, he decided that one day he was going to throw his sweaty shirt into a grain box and close it and see what would happen. And a mouse came out of nowhere. A mouse. So he said, if you take a sweaty shirt and put it in a grain box and close it up, a mouse, you'll create a mouse. So he tested it over and over again, and guess what? Lots of mice. So that once again solidified, I mean, this is the mid-1600s from Aristotle's 350 BC. That's almost 2,000 years. People believed this. And then, about that same time that Van Helmont was doing his little spontaneous generation tests, Francisco Redi, don't you love these names? He questioned that law. Redi challenged that law. And he said, what if you took the meat and then isolated the material from the surroundings? So what he said was he put a sealed jar, he put the meat in a sealed jar and put a lid on it. No maggots. Different types of meat were put in jars. No maggots. He retested under these new surroundings. No maggots and no mouse. So Then he claimed that the maggots appeared on the meat not because they're formed by the meat, but because the meat draws flies, which lay their larvae on the meat, and the larva turns into maggots because that's what they are. Of course, the scientists of his day said that by sealing the jars, he cut off the air supply, which would stop the maggots from forming. So he had to do this all over again. So then what he did is he took a net, like a little net covering, and covered it. And he had adequate isolation from the meat and the surroundings, and maggots once again never formed. So he put the net on it, and it still never formed. A scientific law, one from which has been supported for almost 2,000 years, was wrong. Of course, many scientists were simply unwilling to accept this, and they agreed perhaps that maggots didn't come from decaying meat, but surely there was some type of organism that would spontaneously generate. So, in the 1670s, almost 100 years later, Anton von Leeuwenhoek had found such organisms that he wanted to see organisms that you couldn't see with the naked eye. So he made the first microscope. He wanted to see microorganisms, and those are living creatures that are too small to see with your eyes. Leeuwenhoek and many others showed that microorganisms did indeed seem to generate spontaneously. For example, in the mid-1700s, John Needham did experiments very similar to Reddy's, and Needham made a liquid broth of nutrient-rich material like chicken broth. If you boiled an infusion for several minutes, you could kill the microorganisms in it. And if you put a cork in the flask that held the infusion, microorganisms would appear in the infusion within a few days. He said that means it's spontaneous generation. But then, here's a good one. Lazzaro Spallanzani, a contemporary of Needham, didn't like his experiments. He said that Needham didn't boil the infusion long enough to completely kill off all the microorganisms that were in there to begin with. So he boiled the infusions for a long time, sealed the flask, and actually melted the opening shut. Guess what? Nothing. Nothing grew inside of it. In 1859, however, the great scientist Louis Pasteur finally demonstrated that even microorganisms cannot spontaneously generate. In his experiments in figure 1.4, Pasteur stored the infusion in a flask that had a curved neck. The curved neck allowed air to reach the infusion, but because microorganisms were heavier than the air, they settled inside of the little curved neck. Pasteur repeated Needham's experiments in the curved flask. No microorganisms appeared. In the final blow, Pasteur even showed that if you tipped the flask once to allow any microorganisms that might be trapped in to fall in the infusion, microorganisms would then appear in the infusion. So Pasteur showed them that even microorganisms cannot spontaneously generate. They were reintroduced. The point of this rather long discussion is simple. Even though a scientific law seems to be supported by hundreds of years of experiments, it might still be wrong because these experiments will be flawed. People are flawed and they will mess up these experiments. But that doesn't mean they should stop doing it. Just because it's not 100% reliable doesn't mean they shouldn't stop doing it. It means that they're still looking for answers. They're still trying to figure it out. And God gives us that desire to seek out those things. God gives us the want to see his creation. I mean, can you imagine not having a microscope to be able to look at these tiny little things to see these are so tiny in our God, in our universe, and we to these things are so big. It's just amazing. So, after this long story, it might surprise you to learn that there are many scientists who still believe in spontaneous generation. They don't call it spontaneous generation anymore, though. They call it abiogenesis. A means without. Bio means life. Genesis means the origin. So without life's origin, that means things can just happen out of nowhere. And that is where a theory of evolution came along. And according to a lot of scientists, that is scientific law. They believe that something happened from nothing. But we know better. We have historical documentation that tells us that God created the heavens and the earth, and that all things through Christ, to him and for him, were made. How amazing. We have historical documentation, and theirs is just a no God. I'm going to deny creation. I'm going to deny God because I don't want that to be true. I'm going to develop some other theory. And they've done flawed tests to try to substantiate that. But there will be one day when every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, and they will not be able to defy his creation. That's amazing. That makes me teary. So, how are we living in the scientific method today? Well, we have been exposed to what they're calling a novel virus in the coronavirus. It is a new virus. Now, there are previous coronaviruses, but this one is different. It's mutated and it's new. So what we're living in right now is, I wonder what. So what's happening is we had this exposure where doctors started trying to figure it out in February and March of this year. People were dying. I know that y'all have heard on the news and all these stories about all these people in China and in Italy. Do y'all remember seeing the trucks that pulled up and people were just loading big semi-trucks with body bags? Lots of people were dying, and they were dying fast, and the doctors didn't have any idea how to help here. So what they did is they shut everything down. They tried to keep people away from each other because they did not know what to do. So they started doing tests. Does it help if we use this medicine? Does it help if we put them on a ventilator? Does it help if we do this? Does it help if we put on a mask? Does it help if we don't do a mask? Does it help if we put a shield on? That is the scientific method. These doctors and these scientists are doing I truly believe, as a nurse myself, and one of my good friends is an epidemiologist, that his wife is one of the heads over this COVID-19 team with the CDC in Atlanta. I worked intensive care I worked cardiac ICU. I have numerous friends that are still working that unit, but now they're COVID units. And I hear their stories. I've seen people that I know that have gotten sick. I see people that I know that have died. I have friends who are doctors and physician's assistants in the emergency rooms, and I hear their stories about what they're seeing every day. So it's still being figured out. They're still trying to figure it out. So when you hear people say, and I'm sure I'm not making a stance on what I believe and what I know to be true against what somebody doesn't believe or doesn't know to be true. What I'm saying is, at first they said, do not wear a mask. You could just make it so much worse. That was someone's hypothesis because they were trying to save lives. Then they did tests, and they found that wearing a mask was beneficial. And it created a barrier for the airborne droplets. That being said, they said, okay, everybody wear a mask, because we've tested this over and over again, and our theory is that if you wear a mask, it'll at least hold your droplets in and keep other people from being sick. And then other people said, if we try this medication, it works. It is saving people's lives. But then there was another group of people that it was damaging their heart and liver. So they didn't really feel like it was safe to give that medicine to everyone as a status quo. So they've been doing tests on people who have had COVID. You've heard this on the news and in reports, but they've done tests of people that have had COVID that they have antibodies. So they take the blood from the people who have the antibodies and give that blood to these people that are very sick in hopes that they can help those people build up their antibodies to be able to fight the disease better. These are all hypotheses and theories. This is what we're living in right now, is the scientific method played out. But guess what? We're flawed. People can say, oh, this doctor's an idiot because he said do this, but now he's saying don't do this and don't do this, and now you need this. He's giving it his best shot. He's working out with teams of scientists to try to help figure out what we can do to slow it down, what we can do to stop it, what we can do to keep people from dying, what we can do to keep people out of the hospitals and off ventilators. So we are living the scientific method, and it's amazing to watch once you know what it is. Once you see what our books are telling us, once you know that we are flawed and we're going to mess up, it's going to be crazy. It's just crazy. But what we're responsible for is to be a good steward and to put others ahead of ourselves, our own wants, our own desires, and our own comfort. And if that means that someone wear a mask when they don't want to, then you do what you don't want to do. If it means that someone who's more vulnerable stay home, then that's what they need to do. If it means that more people will get sick and die, that's going to happen. So, but we are as scientists, as we're learning all this science, we see this in play every day. And pay attention to it. Pay attention to them saying, okay, we're seeing this works, and this works. And they have to do so much data and collect so much information just to see if it works, even with a vaccine. They're doing vaccine trials now. If we inject this vaccine, the person will be immune to it for hopefully a year at least. So they're going to try it over and over again. And then they watch for the results to see what happens. So it's a horrible time right now. It is. Everybody knows that. Nobody's having woohoo right now. It's a hard time. But from a scientific point of view, as you're learning science, you get to see the scientific method in true light. Pay attention to it. Pray for those doctors and leaders and nurses who are out there working and doing their best. Pray for wisdom and discernment for those scientists who are having to make choices that the rest of the community and nation has to go under and live under. Pray for your brothers and sisters in Christ. Pray for the people they're humans. Pray for people of the earth, that through these things that make us insane, that we can still give God glory in it, that we can find a way in our hearts to give God glory. So it's really interesting that you're in biology in a year that we're going to learn, because we're living in the scientific method. Here in a few weeks, we're going to be doing some tests and growing bacteria, and we're going to do some scientific methodology, and we're going to try to come up with ways to figure out what grows and how it grows. And I look forward to doing that with y'all. Now, what I want you to do, it's been, looking at my time clock, it's an hour and 5 minutes roundabout since I started this lecture. This is a 2-hour class, so you've got some time. Go ahead, finish your on your owns. Okay, do your on your owns, finish the on your owns right now in class. For this section, you're going to stop on the bottom of page 16. So you're going to be doing from 2.1, which we already kind of did together, to 1.1 to 1.5. So do all those today. When you're finished with that, go ahead and start reading. Start reading this module. I want you to be very familiar with the information that I've given you, because when we come back in next week, we're going to pick up on Kingdom Class Philo Order, all that good stuff, and we're going to be learning about biological keys, and that's a lot of fun. It's going to be a good, fun couple of weeks, but I'll be back here next week, and I'll be live. So hopefully everybody can stay well, and we'll do well to have school again next week. So do your reading, do your on your owns, and you should have already completed your microscope worksheet. If you haven't, go into your iGrade, watch the videos, and complete it, okay? Next week I'll be handing out your tests that you'll take home and do, and everything will be due on the 24th of August. All your on your owns, your tests, your lab sheet, from the biological key I'm going to give you. You'll have a lot of stuff due. All of Module 1's information is due on the 24th. So go ahead and get started on your lab sheet for your microscopes, on your owns, and read. That's what you're going to do today. I will see you all next week with bells on. I'll be all happy to see y'all again. See you later.